The need to be needed. She's a good-hearted woman. In love with a good-timin' man. She loves him in spite of his wicked ways. That she don't understand. Good-hearted woman. I don't know how she does it all. I'd go crazy if I had to cope with what she copes with. You know, I've never heard her complain. Why does she put up with it? What does she see in him, anyway? She could do so much better. People tend to say these kinds of things about a woman who loves too much, as they observe what appear to be her noble efforts to make the best of a seemingly unrewarding situation. But clues that explain the mystery of her devoted attachment can usually be found in her childhood experiences. Most of us grow up and continue in the roles we adopted in our families of origin. For many women who love too much, those roles often meant that we denied our own needs while trying to meet the needs of other family members. Perhaps we were forced by circumstances to grow up too fast, prematurely taking on adult responsibilities because our mother or father was too sick physically or emotionally to carry out the appropriate parental functions. Or perhaps a parent was absent due to death or divorce, and we tried to fill in, helping to take care of both our siblings and our remaining parent. Maybe we became the mommy at home while our own mother worked to support the family. Or we might have lived with both parents, but because one was angry or frustrated or unhappy and the other would not respond sympathetically, we found ourselves in the role of confidant, hearing details of their relationship that were too much for us to handle emotionally. We listened because we were afraid of the consequences to the suffering parent if we didn't, and afraid of the loss of love if we failed to fill the role prescribed for us. And so we didn't protect ourselves, and our parents didn't protect us either, because they needed to see us as stronger than we were, even though we were too immature for the responsibility. We ended up protecting them. When this happened, we learned too young and too well how to take care of everyone but ourselves. Our own needs for love, attention, nurturing, and security went unmet while we pretended to be more powerful and less fearful, more grown up and less needy than we really felt. And having learned to deny our own yearning to be taken care of, we grew up looking for more opportunities to do what we had become so good at, being preoccupied with someone else's wants and demands rather than acknowledging our own fear and pain and unmet needs. We've been pretending to be grown up for so long, asking for so little and doing so much, that now it seems too late to take our turn. So we help and hope that our fear will go away and our reward will be love. Melanie's story is a case in point, an example of how growing up too fast, with too much responsibility, in this case, filling in for an absent parent, can create a compulsion to nurture. The day we met, right after a lecture I had given to a group of nursing students, I couldn't help but notice that her face was a study in contrasts. The small, upturned nose with its splash of freckles and the deeply dimpled cheeks of buttermilk skin gave her an appealingly impish air. Those sprightly features seemed out of place on the same countenance that displayed such dark circles beneath her clear gray eyes. From under a cap of dark auburn waves, she looked like a pale, tired pixie. She had waded off to one side as I spoke at some length with each of the half-dozen nursing students who had lingered behind once my lecture had ended. As frequently happened, whenever I spoke on the subject of the family disease of alcoholism, several students wanted to discuss matters too personal for the usual question-answer chat period following my presentation. When the last of her classmates had gone, Melanie allowed me a moment's hiatus and then introduced herself, shaking my hand warmly and firmly for someone as slight and delicate as she was. She had waited so long and so patiently to speak to me that, in spite of her apparent self-assuredness, I suspected a depth of feeling had been tapped by the morning's lecture. To give her an opportunity to talk at length, I invited her to join me in a walk across campus. As I gathered my belongings and we left the lecture hall, she chatted companionably, but once we were outside in the gray November noon she became quietly reflective. We walked along a deserted path, the only sound the powdery crackle of fallen sycamore leaves, brittle beneath our feet. Melanie fell out of step to scuff at a couple of the ragged star shapes, their pointed tips curling upward like dried starfish, exposing their pale undersides. After a while she said softly, "My mother wasn't an alcoholic, but from what you described this morning about the way that disease affects a family, she might as well have been. She was mentally ill, really very crazy, and it finally killed her. She suffered from deep depressions, went to the hospital a lot, and sometimes stayed away a long time. The drugs they used to cure her just seemed to make her worse. Instead of an alert crazy woman, she became a zoned out crazy woman. But, as zonked as those drugs kept her, she finally managed to make one of her suicide attempts stick. Although we tried never to leave her by herself that day. We had all gone off in different directions just for a little while. She hanged herself in the garage. My father found her. She shook her head quickly, unsettling the dark memories that were gathering there, and continued. I heard a lot that I could identify with this morning, but you said in your lecture that children of alcoholics are from other dysfunctional homes like ours very often choose partners who are alcoholic or addicted to other drugs, and that's not true of Sean. He doesn't care much about drinking or getting loaded, thank God. But we do have other problems. She looked away from me, lifting her chin. I can usually handle anything, the chin lowered, but it's beginning to get to me. Then she looked squarely at me, smiled, and shrugged. I'm running out of food and money. And time, that's all. She said this as though it were the punchline of a joke, to be responded to with amusement. Not to be taken seriously. I had to prod her for the details, which she reported matter-of-factly. Sean's gone again. We have 3 children, Susie, 6, Jim my, 4, and Peter, who is 2.5. I'm working part-time as a ward clerk, going for my RN in nursing school, and trying to keep it all together at home. Sean usually watches the kids when he's not in art school, or gone. She said this without a trace of bitterness. We were married 7 years ago. I was 17 and right out of high school. He was 24, doing some acting and going to school part-time. He had an apartment with 3 friends. I used to go over on Sundays and make them all these great feasts. I was his Sunday night date. Fridays and Saturdays he was either doing a stage performance or seeing someone else. Anyway, they all loved me at that apartment. My cooking was the greatest thing that happened to them all week. They used to tease Sean, tell him he ought to marry me and let me take care of him. I guess he liked the idea because that's what he did. He asked me to marry him and of course I said yes. I was thrilled. He was so handsome. Look. She opened her purse and took out a little sheaf of plastic encased photographs. The first one was of Sean, dark eyes, chiseled cheekbones, and a deeply cleft chin combined in a broodingly handsome face. It was a wallet-sized version of what looked like a photograph taken for an actor's or model's portfolio. I asked whether this was the case, and Melanie confirmed that it was, naming a well-known photographer who had done the work. He looks like a perfect Heathcliff, I observed, and she nodded proudly. We looked together at the other pictures, which showed 3 children in various stages of their development, crawling, taking tottering steps, blowing out birthday candles, hoping to see a less posed photograph of Sean. I commented that he wasn't in any of the children's pictures. No, he usually takes the pictures. He's had quite a background in photography as well as acting and art. Does he work in any of those fields now? I asked. Well, no. His mother sent him some money so he took off for New York. Again, to see what opportunities there are for him there. Her voice dropped almost imperceptibly. Given her obvious loyalty to Sean, I would have expected Melanie to sound hopeful regarding this foray to New York. Since she did not, I asked, Melanie, what is it? With the first trace of complaint, She said, the problem isn't our marriage. It's his mother. She keeps sending him money every time he's about to settle down with us, or is sticking to a job for a change. She'll send him a check and off he goes. She can't say no to him. If she'd just stop giving him money, we'd be all right. What if she never stops? I asked. Then Sean will have to change. I'll make him see how he's hurting us. Tears appeared on her dark lashes. He'll have to refuse when she offers him money. Melanie, that doesn't sound too likely from what you're telling me. Her voice rose and became more determined. She's not going to ruin this thing. He will change. Melanie found an especially large leaf, and for the next several steps she kicked it ahead of her, watching it disintegrate. I waited a few moments and then asked, is there more? Still kicking away, Melanie answered, he's been to New York lots of times. And he has someone else he sees when he's there. Softly again, and again matter-of-factly. Another woman? I asked, and Melanie looked away as she nodded. How long has he been involved? Oh, years, really. At this point Melanie actually shrugged. It started with my first pregnancy. I almost didn't blame him. I was so sick and miserable and he was so far away. Amazingly, Melanie assumed the blame for Sean's infidelity to her, as well as the burden of supporting him and their children while he dabbled at various careers. I asked her if she had ever considered divorce. Actually, we did separate once. That's silly to say, because we're separated all the time, with his going off the way he does. But once I said I wanted a separation, mostly to teach him a lesson, and so for almost 6 months we really were apart. He'd still call me, and I would send him money when he needed it, if some opportunity were about to break and he needed something to tide him over until it did. But for the most part we were each on our own. I even met 2 other men. Melanie sounded surprised that other men would be interested in her. She puzzled. Both of them were so nice to the children, and they each wanted to help me around the house, fixing up what needed repairing and even buying me little things that I needed. It was nice having them treat me that way. But the feelings were just never really there on my part. I could never feel anything like the attraction that I still felt for Sean. So eventually I went back to him. She grinned. Then I had to explain to him why everything was in such good shape at home. We were halfway across the campus and I wanted to know more about what Melanie's childhood had been like, to understand the experiences that had prepared her for the hardship of her present situation. When you remember yourself as a child, what do you see? I asked and watched her brow furrow as she looked back through the years. Oh, that's funny. I see myself in my apron, standing on a stool in front of the stove, stirring a pot. I was the middle child of 5, and I was 14 when my mother died, but I started cooking and cleaning long before that. Because she was so sick. She just never came out of the back room after a while. My 2 older brothers got jobs after school to help out, and I sort of took over as mother for everybody. My 2 sisters were 3 and 5 years younger than I, so it was up to me to do almost everything at home. But we managed okay. Daddy worked and shopped. I cooked and cleaned. We did all we could. Money was always scarce, but we made do. Daddy worked awfully hard, frequently holding down 2 jobs. So he was gone from home much of the time. I think he stayed away partly because he had to, and partly to avoid my mother. We all avoided her as much as we could. She was so difficult. My father remarried when I was a senior in high school. Things immediately became easier because his new wife worked too and had a daughter the same age as my youngest sister, who was 12 then. Everything just blended together. Money wasn't such a problem. Dad was much happier. There was enough to go around for really the first time. I asked, what were your feelings about your mother's death? Melanie set her jaw. The person who died had not been my mother for many years. She was someone else. Someone who slept or screamed and made trouble. I remember her when She was still my mother, but it's vague. I have to go way back to someone who was soft and sweet and used to sing while she worked or played with us. You know, she was Irish and she would sing such melancholy songs. Anyway, I think we were relieved when she finally died. But I felt guilty, too, that maybe if I'd only understood her better or cared more, she wouldn't have gotten so sick. I don't think about it if I can help it. We were nearing my destination, and in the few moments we had left I hoped to help Melanie see at least a glimpse of the origin of her troubles in the present. Do you see any similarities between your life as a child and now? I asked. She gave an uncomfortable little laugh. More than ever before, just talking about it now, I see how I'm still waiting for Sean to come home, just as I waited for my father when he was gone, and I realize how I never blame Sean for what he's doing because I've got his going away all mixed up in my mind with my father going away so that he could take care of us all. I can see how it's not the same thing, and yet I feel the same way about it, as if I should just make the best of it. She paused, squinting to look harder at the patterns unfolding before her. Oh, and I'm still the brave little Melanie, holding it all together, stirring the pot on the stove, taking care of the children. Her creamy cheeks flushed pink with the shock of recognition. So it's true what you said in your lecture about children, like I was. We do find people with whom we can play the same roles we did when we were growing up. As we parted, Melanie hugged me hard and said, "Thanks for listening. I just needed to talk about it a little, I guess. And I do understand better, but I'm not ready to quit, not yet." Her spirits were obviously lighter as she said, "Chin up again, besides, Sean just needs to grow up. And he will. He's got to, don't you think?" Without waiting for a reply, she turned and strode through the fallen leaves. Melanie's insight had indeed deepened, but many other similarities between her childhood and her present life still remained outside her awareness. Why would a bright, attractive, energetic, and capable young woman like Melanie need a relationship so fraught with pain and hardship as was hers with Sean? Because for her and other women who have grown up in deeply unhappy homes, where the emotional burdens were too heavy and the responsibilities too great, for these women, what feels good and what feels bad have become confused and entangled. And finally one and the same. For instance, in Melanie's home, parental attention was negligible due to the general unmanageability of life as the family tried to cope with the mother's disintegrating personality. Melanie's heroic efforts to manage the household were rewarded with the closest thing to love she was to experience: her father's grateful dependency on her, the feelings of fear and being burdened that would be natural to a child in such circumstances were overshadowed by her sense of competence, which grew out of her father's need for her help and her mother's inadequacy. Heady stuff for a child, to be treated as stronger than one parent and indispensable to the other. This childhood role formed her identity as a savior who could rise above difficulty and chaos, rescuing those around her through her courage, strength, and indomitable will. This savior complex sounds healthier than it is. While to have strength in a crisis is laudable, Melanie, like other women of similar backgrounds, needed crises in order to function. Without uproar, stress, or a desperate situation to manage, the buried childhood feelings of being emotionally overwhelmed would surface and become too threatening. As a child, Melanie was her father's helper, as well as mother to the other children. But she was also a child in need of parenting, and since her mother was too disturbed emotionally and her father too unavailable, her own needs went unmet. The other children had Melanie to fuss over them, worry about them, take care of them. Melanie had no one. Not only was she without a mother, she also had to learn to think and act like an adult. There was no place, no time for expressing her own panic, and soon that very lack of opportunity to take her turn emotionally began to feel right to her. If she pretended hard enough to be a Grown up, she could manage to forget that she was a frightened child. Soon Melanie not only functioned well in chaos, she actually required it to function at all. The burden she shouldered helped her avoid her own panic and pain. It weighed her down and brought her relief at the same time. Further, the sense of worth she developed resulted from carrying responsibilities that were very nearly beyond her capabilities as a child. She earned approval by working hard, taking care of others, and sacrificing her own wants and needs to theirs. Thus, martyrdom also became part of her personality, and combined with her savior complex to make Melanie a virtual magnet for someone who spelled trouble, someone like Sean. It is helpful to very briefly review some important aspects of child development in order to better understand the forces at work in Melanie's life, because, due to the unusual circumstances of her childhood, what would have otherwise been normal feelings and reactions became dangerously exaggerated in Melanie. For children growing up in a nuclear family, it is natural to entertain strong wishes to be rid of the same sex parent so as to have the beloved opposite sex parent all to themselves. Little boys heartily wish that daddy would disappear so that they could have all of mommy's love and attention. And little girls dream of replacing their mothers as daddy's wife. Most parents have received proposals from their young children of the opposite sex that express this yearning. A 4-year-old boy says to his mother, "When I grow up I'm going to marry you, mommy." Or a 3-year-old girl says to her father, "Daddy, let's you and me have our own house together without mommy." These very normal yearnings reflect some of the strongest feelings a young child experiences. Yet should something actually happen to the envied rival, resulting in that parent's harm or absence from the family, the effect on the child can be devastating. When the mother in such a family is emotionally disturbed, severely and chronically ill physically, alcoholic, or drug addicted, or otherwise physically or emotionally absent for whatever reason, then the daughter, usually the oldest daughter, if there are 2 or more, is almost invariably elected to fill the position left vacant due to the mother's illness or absence. Melanie's story exemplifies the effects of such a promotion on a young girl. Due to the presence of debilitating mental illness in her mother, Melanie fell heir to the position of female head of household. During the years when her own identity was forming, she was, in many respects, her father's partner, rather than his daughter. As they discussed and managed the problems of the household, they operated as a team. In a sense, Melanie had her father all to herself because she had a relationship with him that was profoundly different from what her siblings had. She was very nearly his peer. She was also, for several years, much stronger and more stable than her sick mother. This meant that Melanie's normal childhood wishes to have her father all to herself were realized, but at the cost of her mother's health and finally her mother's life. What happens when one's early childhood wishes to be rid of the same sex parent and obtain the opposite sex parent for one's own come true? There are 3 extremely powerful, character-determining, and unconsciously operating consequences. The first is guilt. Melanie felt guilty when she recalled her mother's suicide and her failure to prevent it, the kind of consciously experienced guilt any family member naturally feels in the face of such a tragedy. In Melanie, this conscious guilt was exacerbated by her overdeveloped sense of responsibility for the welfare of all her family members. But in addition to this heavy burden of conscious guilt, she carried another even heavier load. The realization of her childhood wishes to have her father to herself produced in Melanie an unconscious guilt in addition to the conscious guilt she felt for not saving her mentally ill mother from suicide. This in turn generated a drive for atonement, a need to suffer and endure hardship as expiation. This need, combined with Melanie's familiarity with a martyr's role, created in her something close to masochism. There was comfort, if not actual pleasure, in her relationship with Sean, with all its inherent pain, loneliness, and overwhelming responsibility. The second consequence is unconscious feelings of discomfort at the sexual implications of having the desired parent to oneself. Ordinarily, the presence of the mother or, in these days of frequent divorce, another companion and sexual partner for the father, such as a stepmother or girlfriend, provides safety for both father and daughter. The daughter is free to develop a sense of herself as attractive and beloved in the eyes of her father, while protected from overt acting out of the sexual impulses inevitably generated between them by the strength of his bond with an appropriate adult female. An incestuous relationship did not develop between Melanie and her father, but given their circumstances it certainly could have. The dynamics operating in their family are very frequently present when incestuous relationships develop between fathers and daughters. When a mother, for whatever reason, abdicates her appropriate role as her husband's partner and her child's parent, and causes a daughter to be elevated to that position, she is forcing her daughter not only to take over her responsibilities but also to be at risk of becoming the object of the father's sexual advances. While this might sound as if all responsibility lies with the mother, in fact it is always the father's complete responsibility if incest occurs. This is because, as the adult, it is his duty to protect his child rather than to ever use her for his sexual gratification. Further, even if the father never approaches the daughter sexually, the lack of a strong couple bond between the parents and the daughter's assumption of her mother's role in the family serve to heighten feelings of sexual attraction between father and daughter. Because of their close relationship, the daughter may be uncomfortably aware that her father's special interest in her is tinged at some level with sexual overtones, or the unusual emotional availability of her father may cause the daughter to focus her burgeoning sexual feelings on him more than she would under ordinary circumstances. In an effort to avoid violating, even in thought, the powerful incest taboo, she may numb herself to most or even all of her sexual feelings. The decision to do so is, again, unconscious, a defense against the most threatening impulse of all, sexual attraction for a parent. Because it is unconscious, the decision is not easily examined and reversed. The result is a young woman who may be uncomfortable with any sexual feelings, because of the unconscious taboo violations connected with them. When this happens, nurturing may be the only safe expression of love. Melanie's primary mode of relating to Sean was to feel responsible for him. This had long since become her way of feeling and expressing love. When she was 17, her father replaced Melanie with his new wife. A marriage that she apparently welcomed with relief, that she felt so little bitterness at the loss of her role at home was probably due in large part to the appearance of Sean and his roommates, for whom she performed many of the same functions she had previously performed at home. If that situation had not developed into a marriage between Sean and herself, Melanie might have faced a profound identity crisis at this point. As it was, she immediately became pregnant, thus recreating her caretaking role, while Sean cooperated by beginning, like her father, to be absent much of the time. She sent him money even when they were separated, competing with his mother to be the woman who took care of him best. This was a competition she had already won with her own mother, in relationship to her own father. When, during her separation from Sean, men appeared in her life who did not require her mothering, who in fact attempted to reverse roles with her by offering her much-needed help, she could not relate emotionally to them. She was only comfortable as the caregiver. The sexual dynamics of Melanie's relationship with Sean had never provided the powerful bond between them that his need for her caretaking did. In fact, Sean's infidelity simply provided Melanie with another reflection of her childhood experience. Because of her advancing mental illness, Melanie's mother became an increasingly vague, barely visible, other woman, in the back room of the house, emotionally and physically removed from Melanie's life and thoughts. Melanie managed her relationship with her mother by keeping a distance and not thinking about her. Later, when Sean had another love interest, this woman, too, was vague and far away, not perceived as a real threat to what was, like her earlier relationship with her father, a somewhat asexual but practical partnership. Remember, Sean's behavior was not unprecedented. Before they ever married, his established pattern had been to seek other women's company while allowing Melanie to take care of his practical, less romantic needs. Melanie knew this and yet married him. After marriage, she began a campaign to change him through the force of her will and her love. Which brings us to the third consequence of Melanie's realization of her childhood wishes and fantasies, her belief in her own omnipotence. Young children normally believe themselves, their thoughts, and their wishes to be magically powerful, the cause of all significant events in their lives. Ordinarily, however, even though a little girl may passionately wish to be her father's partner for life, reality teaches her that she cannot. Like it or not, she eventually must accept the fact that his partner is her mother. This is a great lesson in her young life, that she cannot always bring about, through the power of her will, that which she wants most. Indeed, this lesson does much to dismantle her belief in her own omnipotence and helps her to come to terms with the limitations of her personal will. In the case of young Melanie, however, that most powerful wish came true. She did, in many ways, replace her mother. Apparently through the magical powers of her wishes and her will, she won her father for herself. Then, with an undaunted belief in the power of her will to bring about what she desired, she was drawn to other difficult and emotionally charged situations, which she also tried to magically change. The challenges she later uncomplainingly faced, armed with only the weapon of her will, an irresponsible, immature, and unfaithful husband, the burden of raising 3 children virtually alone, severe money problems, and a demanding academic program coupled with a full-time job, all testified to this. Sean provided Melanie with a perfect foil for her efforts to change another person through the power of her will, just as he met the other needs fostered by her pseudo-adult role in childhood, in that he gave her ample opportunity to suffer and endure, and to avoid sexuality while exercising her predilection for nurturing. It should be very clear by now that Melanie was in no way a hapless victim of an unhappy marriage. Quite the opposite. She and Sean met every one of each other's most profound psychological needs. Theirs was a perfect fit. The fact that his mother's timely gifts of money conveniently short-circuited any drive toward growth or maturity in Sean was certainly a problem to this marriage, but not, as Melanie chose to see it, the problem. What was really wrong was the fact that here were 2 people whose unhealthy patterns of living and attitudes toward life, though by no means identical, meshed so well that they actually enabled each other to remain unhealthy. Imagine these 2, Sean and Melanie, as dancers in a world in which everyone is a dancer, and grows up learning his or her individual routines due to particular events and personalities. And, most of all, by learning the dances that were performed with them throughout their childhoods. Sean and Melanie each developed a unique repertoire of psychological steps, movements, and gestures. Then one day they met and discovered that their dissimilar dances, when performed together, magically synchronized into an exquisite duet, a perfect pas de deux of action and reaction. Each movement made by one was responded to by the other, resulting in choreography that enabled their joined dances to flow, uninterrupted, round and round and round. Whenever he let go of a responsibility, she quickly picked it up. When she gathered to herself all the familiar burdens of raising their family, he pirouetted away, allowing her plenty of room to do her caretaking. When he searched the stage for other female companionship, she sighed with relief and danced faster to distract herself. While he danced away, exiting off stage, she performed a perfect waiting step. Round and round and round. For Melanie, it was sometimes an exciting dance, often a lonely one. Occasionally it was embarrassing or exhausting. But the last thing she wanted was to stop the dance she knew so well. The steps, the moves, all felt so right that she was sure the name of the dance was love.